The video you are watching was created as part of Round 4 of the Creators Competition, where a group of upcoming Magic the Gathering content creators have been thrown into a reality TV-like setting, consisting of a series of challenges designed to probe their creative and technical limits. Every 2 weeks, a creator is voted off the show by the judges, and this video represents our attempt to remain off the chopping block. I hope you enjoy The Scorpion God's Dream and Nightmares.
MTG and me, this is Charles, and this week we're brewing up something a little different. A casual modern deck centered around one of the fallen gods of Amonkhet. Enter the Scorpion God. You might be familiar with this guy. He's a giant scorpion and one of the original gods of Amonkhet, released from a long slumber after having been imprisoned by none other than Nicol Bolas himself. The Scorpion God, whose original name is Long Lost, was tasked with the destruction of the other gods of Amonkhet upon his release. But during those long years of sleep, tucked away in a sarcophagus, surely during that slumber his dreams were rife with the most disturbing of imagery. Images of horrible creatures skidding across the deserts of Amonkhet, attacking the Hekma. Sights of desolate suns crossing the land, an everlasting torment, an inquisition of pain, the brutality of death and destruction for all. Yet despite the seemingly unending torment, the visions he has of the hour of glory, the Scorpion God is a patient God, one willing to wait for the right time to strike, when nobody is watching. A time to succeed in his goal of destroying the plane on behalf of his lord and master, Nicol Bolas. So the deck is designed as a black-red, mid-range deck with some control elements. Strip your opponents of relevant spells early in the game to land one of your Wither or -1/-1 counter effects. Then draw cards off the destruction of creatures until you're able to attack in with the Scorpion God, perhaps with the Lash Writhe equipped, or land a couple of Red Sun Zeniths for lethal damage. With all that in mind, let's take a look at the build. I'm going to start with enchantments. We're only running one of them, but I think it's a key part of the deck. So we're going to run 3 copies of Everlasting Torment. What Everlasting Torment does for the deck is it changes all damage to -1/-1 counters and stops any other deck from having life gain effects. It's also a super flavorful card. You should check out that flavor text. And acts as copies 5 through 7 of Soulscar Mage. For creatures, we're going to run 4 copies of Soulscar Mage. This synergizes with all the damage-based effects in the deck. And also provides some early combat damage, and with the prowess triggers, you can sneak in for some early combat damage. Next up, we're going to run 4 copies of Necroskitter. With its Wither effect, it plays into the -1/-1 counter synergy. Additionally, it allows you to steal any opponent's creature that dies from the placement of -1/-1 counters, which is likely to occur given the number of burn effects we have in conjunction with Everlasting Torment and Soulscar Mage. We're going to finish off the creatures with 3 copies of Scorpion God. This is a card draw engine in this deck and also acts as a big finisher with its pseudo-indestructibility. I'm also going to throw in 2 copies of Lash Writhe. Though this isn't strictly a creature, the artifact comes in attached to a 0/0 germ token, and so counts as the 12th and 13th creature. It's also a great way to draw a card if you can throw a -1 counter onto it, and then remove the artifact from the creature, particularly because you can use life to equip Lash Writhe to another creature to help finish out the game. Next up are our instants. We're going to run 3 copies of Kolaghan's Command. The flexibility of Kolaghan's Command is essential here. With it having the ability to deal direct damage, remove an artifact, return a creature from the graveyard, all of these effects are important to the deck and synergize well with the other spells. Next up, we're going to run 4 copies of Lightning Bolt. This provides an outlet to deal direct damage to finish out a game. It removes early threats, and later, once you've landed a Soulscar Mage or Everlasting Torment, is a great way to throw -1/-1 counters onto an opponent's creature. Then we're going to run 3 copies of Volt Charge. This 3-mana instant not only allows us to deal 3 damage to an opposing creature or player, but also generates a proliferate trigger, meaning we can increase the number of -1/-1 counters on the opponent's creatures. For sorceries, we're going to run 1 copy of Black Sun Zenith. This is both a great thematic inclusion in the deck, based on the artwork of the card, but it can also throw multiple -1/-1 counters on every creature on the board, yielding a bunch of card draw later in the game. Next up, we're going to run 3 copies of Collective Brutality. This allows us to strip instants and sorceries from our opponent's hand, also allows us to remove creatures, or in the early game, swing life back and forth. Then 3 copies of Inquisition of Kozilek. Once again, this allows us to remove some early threats and is incredibly mana efficient. Then we're going to run 3 copies of Red Sun Zenith. This can be a really good finisher for the deck and also access some early removal or damage. Finally, we're going to run 1 copy of Sweltering Suns. This synergizes really well with Soulscar Mage or Everlasting Torment, particularly later in the game. So for land base, we're going to run 24 total lands. I think 24 is the right number because we really want to have the mana necessary to cast the Scorpion God on turn 5 to start generating real value from it. So let's take a look at the mana base. We're going to run 3 copies of Blood Crypt and 3 copies of Smoldering Marsh. These 2 dual lands are fetchable by the 4 copies of Bloodstained Mire that we'll also be running. I'm also going to run 1 copy of Graven Cairns. Now I've included this land because there are a number of dual mana cost spells in the deck, and I found that mana filtering can be helpful. But it's entirely possible to be swapped out for another dual like Blood Crypt, or even something like Dragon Skull Summit or another dual land. Then we're going to run 4 mountains and 7 swamps. Now if you look at the mana cost distributed throughout the deck, you'd see that there are in fact more red mana symbols than black mana symbols. However, I don't think playing the extra swamps is going to hurt the deck too much. It's definitely going to help out with casting a larger Lash Writhe. So on to the sideboard. The sideboard is a place where we can fit specific counter strategies for various metas. The sideboard I've included here will address many of the decks you see in Tier 1 and Tier 2 metas. We're going to start with Surgical Extraction. As an instant spell that can be cast for 0 mana at the cost of 2 life and removes early game threats, this card is very useful. For sorceries, we're going to run 2 copies of Dreadbore, primarily to remove troublesome planeswalkers from the battlefield. Next, we're going to run 3 copies of Pyroclasm, mainly against really aggressive low-to-the-ground decks. In this deck, Pyroclasm is actually really good, particularly as it synergizes with both Soulscar Mage and Everlasting Torment. Next, we're going to run 2 copies of Thoughtseize, which can strip out threats that aren't already covered by Inquisition of Kozilek or Collective Brutality. Then 2 Vandal Blast, primarily against Affinity decks or Artifact-heavy decks. 1 Relic of Progenitus for general graveyard hate, 2 copies of Blood Moon to target Tron-based strategies, and 1 Virulent Plague, primarily for token strategies. So what about budget options? Though this is a casual deck, there are some reasonably hard to find cards included. If you're trying to run this list against other tiered decks, I recommend running it as is or with minimal changes, but for a more casual experience, there are plenty of easy to find alternatives. Let's focus on some of the most hard to find cards. For Kolaghan's Command and Collective Brutality, it really is difficult to replace the flexibility that these 2 cards provide, but Profane Command is probably the closest match. It does plenty of stuff and offers the flexibility to slot into the deck well. For less flexible options, Blightning deals 3 damage to the opposing player and forces them to discard 2 for the same mana cost as Kolaghan's Command. Searing Blaze in double red, in conjunction with a landfall trigger, can provide some additional value by causing damage both to the player and a creature, and synergizes well with the rest of the deck. Abrade is another dual mode card that can be used either to remove an artifact or deal 3 damage. Unfortunately for Bloodstained Mire, there's no real great substitutes. However, Gem of Becoming is a fun, flavorful addition that can put both a swamp and a mountain into your hand. But at 3 mana and 3 mana to activate, it's a bit mana intensive. Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse, or even the Jund and Grixis Panoramas can also be substituted for Bloodstained Mire and provide relatively low mana cost ways of fetching out an additional swamp or mountain. You might even consider running something like Igneous Pouncer. So hear me out. So it's not really terrible to pay 2 mana to fix your land on turn 3, and really, if you draw this card later in the game, maybe you just cast it anyway. If you do go this route, however, I don't suggest a straight up 4-for-4 swap. Instead, put a couple of Igneous Pouncers in with some Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse. Next up, instead of Surgical Extraction, you could play copies of Extirpate, which offers similar functionality at the low mana cost of 1 and instant speed. Lost Legacy is also another reasonable, if higher mana costed casual alternative. It even has an upside in the ability to strip cards out of a player's library that have been seen in previous rounds of play. For Thoughtseize, thankfully, Inquisition of Kozilek was recently reprinted and is easily found. Other popular alternatives include both Duress and Despise. Both are incredibly easy to find, but are much less flexible than Thoughtseize. Instead of Blood Moon, you could consider running Crumble to Dust, which could be used against Tron strategies to cripple their mana ramp, although it comes down a turn later. Burning Earth is another option, but one that also causes harm to you, and Crumble to Dust, I believe, is the preferred option here. So alright, that's the basic idea. The Scorpion God has been trapped in slumber for what probably feels like an eternity, dreaming of the day it would be freed to wreak havoc upon the plane. Only now, it's no longer a dream. It's a reality. Thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed the video, you can help us by clicking that like button and leaving a comment. And to support the channel, please click that subscribe button. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for watching.